Now, our last storyteller, I would like to invite up here Larry Thurber. Jerry Thurber.
All right. In 1966, I was 10 years old. My only interest in life was Little League baseball and riding my bicycle with my friend Barry. When my dad came home that evening, he announced that, hey, I just got a job with USAID and we're moving to Somalia. Now, the first thought that came to my mind was, I'm going to get eaten alive by lions or some kind of a wild cannibal out there. And my brother looks at me and he says, that's stupid. It's going to be snakes and spiders. That didn't make it any better for me. So for those of you who don't know, USAID was a brainchild of John F. Kennedy, along with the Peace Corps at that time. And my father was one of the first employees with USAID. The whole idea was to try to bring American prosperity and development to third world countries. And Somalia was clearly a third world country. In fact, it was one of the lowest rated countries at the time. Somalia is, if you don't know about it, Somalia is on the east coast of Africa. And if you think about the way Africa's shaped, it almost looks like a man that's hunched over, and on the back there's a horn. That's Somalia. It's the Horn of Africa. It's about the length of California. On the east side, it's, or let me go with the west side first. On the west side, it's a lot like, you're probably familiar with, say, Kenya and the Serengeti. So it was full of giraffes and zebras and lions. I didn't get any eaten, though. But elephants, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all sort of savanna and grasslands on the west side, where it faces Ethiopia and Kenya. On the right side, the east, it's all beautiful beach. And so the other things you might know about Somalia is that they're known for the Somali pirates, right? So you've probably heard of that. Maybe seen that movie with Captain Phillips and Tom Hanks was Captain Phillips in that. And the other thing you might know about Somalia is Black Hawk Down. So Black Hawk Down was when a bunch of Marines came in on a rescue mission. They were shot down, treated horribly, of course, killed and dragged through the streets. And the reason why I want to mention that to you is because Somalia is one of the most radical countries in the world. They're a radical Islamic nation, and Osama bin Laden actually hung out there for a while just to hide from people. But also what you might know about Somalia is it's one of the most devastated famine countries in the world. Over 100 kids a day die in Somalia. But in the 1960s, it wasn't like that. In the 1960s, it was a land of hope. They had just gained their independence from Great Britain. They had a brand new elected government. They were excited about the future. And we landed at that point in time. But there was also the Cold War going on, and there was Russia there, and there's the United States there. But we didn't care, because what Somalia turned out to be for us kids was the perfect place to be a free-range kid. The reason why I mention that is because we lived in an area that was right near the beach, and we had an American beach club. And every afternoon at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it was too hot to go to school. We went to school from 6 a.m. to 1 o'clock. We had the rest of the day free. I lived about half a mile from the beach. My brother and I and a bunch of us would head on down to the beach club, and that was our playground. And what we would do is when it was high tide, we'd be out playing in the waves, body surfing. We bought these little boogie boards that you could play on from the Italian dive shop. And when it was low tide, we'd go out and we'd go snorkeling. There was a reef out in just about 500 yards or so out from the beach, and you could snorkel around that area and see all kinds of beautiful fish and stuff. But the other thing that happened is that some of the Somali kids would use this beautiful flat beach when it was low tide, and they'd play soccer. Or, of course, for them, it was football. So it was a perfect soccer pitch. But what they used for a soccer was either a goat or a camel bladder. Now, if you think about it, a camel bladder is not round, but you inflate it, it gets roundier, but still not that round. It is actually a little bit heavy, a little bit leathery, and so they'd be kicking this ball around, and who knew where it was going to go? They seemed to know, but we couldn't tell. So at one point, a bunch of us kids decided we're going to go down there and see if we can play with them. Now, of course, being American kids, we didn't know a whole lot about soccer back then. They do now, but we didn't know that much about it in 1966. So we go down there. We didn't speak Somali. They didn't speak English, but that didn't matter. They look at us and they point out, white kids over there, Somalis over there. We were simply wiped out. We were not even in the game. However, we did get even because we formed a basketball league, and they weren't very good at that. So we ended up naming this game that we play with them bladder ball. So we play bladder ball with these kids. Well, one time we were just out in front of the compound where we live. So it's not that it was actually quite safe to live in Somalia then, but the British had left a compound behind, and there were about 12 houses in there. By the way, there were probably only about 50 American families and maybe around 20 or 30 kids that made up the group of Americans at that time. So we were out in front of the compound, and we're playing around. There were a bunch of sand dunes between our compound and where the ocean was. And so we were out playing around in the sand dunes, and suddenly, all of a sudden, these rocks start flying. And we look up, and it's the bladder boys. They're throwing rocks at us. They're not really trying to hit us. They're just landing all over the place. But for us, it was game on. So we start picking up rocks, and we get into this rock fight. They're throwing rocks from behind these sand dunes. We're throwing rocks back at them. There's one sand dune on the right and another sand dune on the left, and that seems to be their fort. And they're going back and forth, and they're throwing rocks from there. Well, at one point, I bend down, and I pick up this rock. Perfect rock. Fit my hand just perfectly. It was a little bit jagged, but it really fit perfectly. And I took that rock and I threw it as hard as I can in between the two sand dunes, because that was a place where nobody was. But wouldn't you know it, the minute I threw that rock, one of the bladder boys, one of the kids who was one of the leaders of the group, he was taller than the rest of them, he decides to run from the right sand dune to the left sand dune. And I can see that rock. It's just flying, and his head's coming. If he'd have taken off a little bit sooner, if he'd have run a little bit faster, a little bit slower, if he'd have been a little bit shorter, if I had thrown that rock a little bit sooner or a little bit later, that rock wouldn't have smashed into the side of that boy's head. So he ran over to the left side sand dune, and about a second or so later, he comes out with his hand on his head, bleeding profusely. And he comes down with some of his friends, and I run over to where my house is. And in the house, I go see this Somali man who worked with us. And I go, Ali, and I tell him what we did. And he said, go get the first aid kit. I'll go get some bandages. So I grabbed first aid kit. He got some bandages. We went down there. Ollie cleans the wound, and then he puts iodine on it. If any of you have ever had iodine on a wound, I don't know about you, but I scream. This kid was very stoic. So he puts iodine on it, and he wraps it up. But then, Ollie made us all shake hands. He made us all stand together and shake hands with each other so that we could continue to be friends. About a year later, the Somali government was overthrown by a Russian-backed coup, and all the Americans were kicked out. They actually eventually were able to come back, but all the Americans were kicked out. And over the course of the last several decades, Somalia has become a place of chaos and ruin. And I thought to myself several years ago, quite naively, why can't they be more like us kids? Why can't they forgive the transgressions and just shake hands? Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Jerry spent most of his career in international business, where he found as much satisfaction crafting clear, compelling business reports as he did pursuing creative writing. In retirement, he's devoted himself to that lifelong love of words through writing, teaching, and volunteering. After spending most of his life in Colorado, Jerry remains an avid outdoorsman and can often be found exploring the trails of Prescott National Forest, where many of his story ideas first take shape. So the song that will get Jerry on the dance floor, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson is the one tonight. So most irrational fear, snakes. That's how many people are afraid of snakes? I'm just curious. It's like, well, actually, just curious. Biggest misconception people have about Jerry is that he's short. He's an early bird and he's a mountain guy. So with that, yeah.